Hello. Welcome to another episode of Season 16 of The Horrific Podcast. We're two friends who live in different places but share a love for scary movies. In each episode, we both watch the same movie on our own and then record a conversation together about what we liked, what we hated, if we were scared, and maybe even some larger truths about why people watch horror movies in the first place. This season, the theme is B movies for C students. We're taking a break from the current trends toward elevated horror and examining the history of horror B movies and how they've developed over time. Thanks for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the episode. So, continuing our journey through the history of horror B movies, we have finally, after all this time, arrived in the year 2000.
In the year 2000.
And it occurred to me that this is our first episode on a movie that came out after 1999 in like a year.
Like, as soon as you said that, a year after 1999, and it immediately hit me like what you're referencing, because this is leagues above 90% of what we had in 1999.
Yeah, a pretty noticeable change, I think, at this point when we get into the 2000s compared to a lot of the movies from before that. So I think it was only appropriate, though, that now that we finally have the freedom to pick from the decade of the 2000s and we can finally move on from the 90s, we decided on a movie that came out exactly in the year 2000.
Yeah.
Like, we're not going too far away out of our comfort zone at this point. Baby steps. But yeah, so last time we did the movie Dead Alive, and it was made in New Zealand. And this week we're doing a movie called Battle Royale from Japan. Had you seen this movie before?
I have, actually. And
okay.
I'd seen it, and then it had been showing up on Tubes as like a recommendation lately.
Yeah.
And I've wanted, I don't know, just didn't do it. And then you suggested, and I was just like, this is fate.
Meant to be.
Yeah, 100%. Because like it sounds made up, but like, I mean, I watched it back, dude, this was when Terry and I were roommates. So that long ago, because I think I had him burn a copy, not me. And because it was around Hunger Games time, because that's what they supposedly they got the idea from this.
Yes, I think
so
that,
I was like, what is this Japanese horror film that they stole this idea from? Not that I wasn't into Hunger Games, but it was just very popular at one time.
Yeah, I think actually a lot of things got a pretty big inspiration from this one.
Yeah,
but it's interesting to me, and you really set me up for the next talking point here, so well done, that you said you had like a burned DVD.
Yeah.
So one reason that I wanted to talk about this movie is because I remember this being one that had a lot of mystique about it. Like, the people that I got it from were like, oh, there's this movie, you can't get it in the US, but here it is. And I'm like, those things don't make sense, because you're in the US and you just said you can't get this in the US, but you have it.
Sounds made up.
Yeah. But as it turns out, because there was a lot of controversy around this one, just because of the violence and like or like teenagers killing each other and stuff. And the whole concept of it was kind of like controversial. And so I guess the production company refused to sell this film to any US distributor because they were concerned that there would actually be like lawsuits. But then eventually in 2010, Anchor Bay Films got the rights and was able to do a direct-to-video release. But I don't think I saw this on video. I saw this way before 2010 because of the internet.
Yeah. Bless the
internet. What's that?
I said, bless the internet, man.
Yeah, and I think that this is the first time that we could really talk about horror B movies being distributed on the internet. like we're getting into the time period, the 2000s, when that was becoming a thing. And so we've had all these discussions about like, yeah, well, there was the Hays Code. And so everything had to be a little bit buttoned up if you were trying to sell the movie to the Hollywood studios. But then you got these independent guys who are out there getting funding and then working with local theaters to be able to get a showing. And then you had the drive-ins that made that an even more lucrative market. And then you had the rise of the independent distributors. And then, you know, ratings came into effect. And so there were kind of, you know, theaters might start making choices about what they show or didn't show based on the ratings. And then you had VHS come along where people could do direct to video releases where nobody could really say no to whatever they wanted to put in the movie. And then now VHS is obsolete at this point, but the internet has kind of become the new frontier. And so in my mind, just because of my own experiences, this is the first movie that I really think of in that era as far as a B horror movie. And so it's always just kind of been like special in my mind because, you know, it felt like I was getting away with something when I saw it, in much the same way that I think probably teenagers or young adults in the early 90s felt like they were getting away with something on VHS and, you know, in the 60s when they were at the drive-in.
Yeah, I think that's a really smart point too, though. It's just the fact that, I mean, you know, obviously we know now internet has their fingers in everything, but like, I don't know if we necessarily knew what door, you know, what Inferno was being open when the
Right.
internet came about. But because like just on YouTube early days, there was worse stuff than what I think was in this film, you know, like,
Oh, for sure.
I've seen people like be murdered on Reddit, you know, like for realsies. I didn't want to, but I seen it happen. And you're just like, what is this? There's no, you know, no code there. So yeah, I mean, it's just, it just kind of opened the door for potential or gnarly things to come out. I'm also a little bit against the whole rating thing because I just feel like if it's legitimate rating, cool. But you know, someone has always put their opinion in this shit, wasting your time.
But then again, I mean, like a week or two ago, I made the joke about how you would probably be in favor of ratings so you didn't end up watching any kids stuff. Like, I kind of go more that direction, is like, oh, this movie's only PG. I'm not going to waste my time. So I do appreciate it a little bit from that
I
regard.
think mine's like, what mindset do I get into when watching?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. If it's like a kids thing, yeah.
More about setting expectations than about control, I guess.
That's true.
What's good about it. But
And that could just be more so like a homies rating, you know, technically
that's
too.
what we should start. Yeah.
Yeah, like this is a homies rating, but just as long as the government keeps their hands out of my ratings, that's all I care about.
Yeah, I actually really like that idea. We should develop our own like gnarly index.
Yeah,
because we watch a lot of R-rated horror movies,
right?
But they are not all equal as far as like how actually disturbing they are. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I mean, I think
it's a good idea.
Yeah, we'll work on that. That'll be, maybe that's what next season is we'll start introducing our own index for rating these.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'm not talking about that this week. We're talking about Battle Royale, and we have a lot to discuss. So I'm going to do a quick introduction, and then we'll get into the, man, that blonde transfer kid was a bad enough shot that he could have been a stormtrooper. Details.
Perfect.
In the year 2000, no one brought us Americans anything. However, Toei Company Limited brought the movie Battle Royale to Japan. This movie was based on a novel of the same name and tells the story of a dystopian future Japan where the collapse of social order leads the government to pass a new law where each year one class of 9th graders gets dropped onto a deserted island with random weapons and only one survivor is allowed to leave, because that makes sense. If you like The Hunger Games or the first Red Rising book, then you should probably send this movie a thank you note. It was made on a budget of around $4.5 million and eventually made over $30 million at the global box office, despite massive delays in being available outside of Japan. It can currently be streamed for free with ads on Tubi.
What were the two references you made?
The Hunger Games series on the whole, and then also the first Red Rising book.
Okay, cool.
And probably lots more. Like I know, like even a lot of video games and stuff have been influenced by this.
So, I mean, yeah. PUBG. I mean, like,
it's that whole thing. But yeah, and I feel like it was weird to me that in the small town in Oklahoma that we grew up in, I knew lots of people who had seen this movie that was an independently made controversial horror film from Japan that had never been released in the US. And that's really interesting because that's what the internet enabled. And so I think that the way that we're going to see these B movies made in the 2000s is going to be like playing into that a lot more. And I'm not really sure what that looks like yet, but it was just like such a new way of trying to get engagement. And I think that some of them figured out how to make money off that. Some of them didn't, but it's just a totally new thing happening at this point in movie history.
Yeah. I think that, I don't know technically when internet came out, but just from my experience, I know that we got a computer mid 90s, but like, would we call it that? Not compared to what we have now, but as the 2000s, maybe once we survived Y2K, everyone was like, hey, everything's going to be okay.
Yeah.
Let's bump it up. But I felt like post 2K 2000s, it was a fun time to be alive. And they got better. I think maybe like 2003, 2004, like that's when I started finding out more about like, you know, torrents and places that you could go to download movies and all that kind of stuff. I was 18 or 16, so I wasn't going to prison.
Yeah.
So because of that, you're downloading like City of God, which is like a Brazilian movie, or, you know, like, or
just whatever's out there.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause you're like, oh, I want to look up this. I've never heard what, you know, Battle Royale is, or, you know, but also like the other stepping stone into it, internet, but then Netflix too, because when Netflix started, when you could get the DVDs from them, you know, it opened the door to a lot more there too.
Yeah, and even just being able to like browse their giant catalog on a website and pick what you wanted out of that was kind of a big deal too. So
I watched the original Office series that was the first thing I rented with Netflix when it was DVDs, and like I could only get like 2 or like 3 discs at a time.
Oh yeah.
And so like I did that for the whole series. You know, it's not like how you can binge watch now. Like you'd watch a disc a day or almost, so you didn't have to wait too long. But
yeah, it was a different time for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So I think a strength of this movie, to very quickly change topics without a real segue,
perfect,
is just I feel like it had a lot of really good imagery. Like it just had a lot of really cool shots. And even in the very like opening with that newscast, you see the winning girl who's like holding the doll covered in blood and she's just smiling super creepy. That's just like an image that sticks with you.
Yeah, you kidding me?
Yeah. And then once it gets a little bit more into it, everyone on the bus joking around and having a good time, and then you realize all the snacks were drugged and everybody passes out, and then the one kid wakes up and then the teacher and driver are wearing gas masks and the teacher comes back and just uses the baton to knock him out.
Yeah.
And you're just like, what is happening? You know, like it escalated so quickly and it really didn't pull punches. Like you saw all the violence happening, but even just the idea of like the teacher and the gas mask with the baton, it's just these really kind of memorable horrific images. And I feel like this movie did a good job of that. And so even though it was like dubbed and that was a little bit distracting because the voices didn't match the people very well, it still had these strong and like striking visuals that would like stick in your mind, so you weren't just paying attention to the stuff that made it kind of weird.
Yeah, the dubbing, for the record, when I watched it, it was not dubbed.
It was subbed. Like a fan sub the first time I saw it.
Yeah, and so way better, in my opinion, just because the voice actors on this were a little off. But yeah, it was. Regardless, that's not what we're here about. we're here about battle royale. There's a couple things. So you mentioned like the scene with the teacher and on the bus and like hitting him and knocking him out. Like I think like the imagery like of itself, like the visual of those scenes, the visual of this film was great. The other thing added to it was like how heartbreaking is it for these, you know, because as much as you don't want to admit it, like kids bond with their teachers, especially if they're in a situation like this, or maybe like a boarding school or whatever the case is. Like that's basically like who they trust, and they just straight up got screwed over by that. I don't know why I guess it'd be that big of a surprise. It sounds like they knew this was going on. But anyway, there's just kind of layers to this whole film that just like, no, it wasn't the thing that frustrates me. For example, with ratings, one of the reasons why it frustrates me is because we couldn't get this because of the violence and stuff. But like the underlying issues that they're kind of like going through, dealing with, and, you know, the kid walking in on his dad suicide, like, dark things like that. Like, I don't know. It just like you miss out on that opportunity, and they're like, well, there's so much blood and guts. And you're like, it's fucking life, weirdos. Like, I don't know what to tell you, but it just gets frustrating with ratings because of that. But the overall with this, I mean, I don't think I've ever seen a film that just looked rainy without raining nonstop.
Right.
Which it made me feel like fall. I mean, you know, it's like the Halloween effect, the movie Halloween effect, you know?
Yeah. And we've talked a lot about how you can really tell when a movie is making an effort so that everything about how it's made supports what it's trying to do. And so I think just the whole aesthetic of this film, from like the way it seemed kind of dark and heavy, was really important to making it feel the way that they were trying to make the viewer engage with it. And ultimately, I mean, like, this was a pretty ridiculous plot for how they got into this situation. Like, it doesn't make a lot of sense, but that's not what's interesting about the movie. I mean, like you said, it's these weird situations and these layered situations and stuff. And I think they even, you know, the practical effects of the deaths were very, very intense. And it was kind of hard to watch a few times, but it was also like harder even than it would have been just because of like the interactions between the characters. And so, you know, these guys are friends, but now they've got to make this choice about, you know, are we going to survive? Somebody's losing it. Like, we used to be friends, but now it's a matter of life and death. And what does that mean? And the way that they kind of break up into their little groups or factions or who can trust who and everything. Like, it really was just an intense movie. And I think that just the sound, the visuals, and even kind of the camera work and the sort of grainy look of it all really contributed to those feelings and just made it work really well.
Yeah. And I think, you know, I think the bonding that the kids go through throughout the film, like the different cliques and all that, like that obviously makes things 10 times more difficult, because one, it's like, that's the human side of them, where like, I would like to think that if that happened to a group of people, that not all of them be like, all right, yeah, hell yeah, we're going to kill each other. You know, it's like, you know, we got to figure out a way out or something. But I think that bond kind of made things gnarly. But then, you know, it adds the layer of like, can you trust who you're with, or can you, which, you know, in this case, it was used in their favor towards the end. But still, it's like you don't know who you could trust. You'd like to think you could trust them. The next thing you know, something random happens and you don't know who they are anymore. Yeah. But I also like how there was like there was a techie kid, you know, like it's like the different, we've talked about this before, but I like kind of like I use this as an example because probably easiest to catch, but like with the Marvel universe, you have like Thor, and then you have Hulk, and then you have, you know, like I like the individual character kind of things in films, and I just, you know, you get the tech guy and you're like, oh man. And here's the thing too, we can't even prove if what he was doing was legit or not, because it wasn't in English, and apparently programming is not a universal language.
Yes, you're saying, could we read what was on that screen? It might have been distractingly bad.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't be able to, but I would ask you what it was doing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. And that is one thing that I feel like about the early 2000s that really stands out too, is just like how outdated all of the technology looks. Because it was such like the early version of so many things that have progressed really quickly over the last 20 years. So, yeah, the old computers were kind of funny.
There's definitely companies out there that are still using that same infrastructure.
Yeah, that's true. He was actually writing code for like a Japanese bank.
Probably, yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, and I think kind of to your point, the relationships between the people and stuff being important. Some of the flashbacks in this were super corny.
Yeah.
And just like cringy to watch.
Like the girl running.
Yeah, or like the two guys sitting in the room talking about like which girl they have a crush on, or like,
oh yeah,
I was so not there for that. But it was also good that they gave us some backstory to explain the relationships between the people, because I think that it did make it feel a lot more visceral, that you knew like these people are close, like they know each other well, and they have like long-term friendships coming into this. It's not just like a bunch of strangers that only ever see each other at school. And so I do think that it added a layer that wouldn't have been there otherwise, even though it was kind of hard to watch sometimes.
Yeah. I think that, I'd definitely say hard to watch. Maybe for me more so because like the action that was going on was more interesting to me. Like, and it could be because I'd seen it before, so I knew some of the, I didn't remember exact, but I knew some of the things that were going on. And so maybe I was like, okay, yeah, we get it. He likes her. She doesn't, whatever, let's go. But like this also has to have like some sort of like social commentary.
For sure.
Going on. And I think that I think that's a good sign of like good writing when obviously social commentary is happening. Granted, it was a different, which even though it's a different, it's a country, it's still pertains to the same things, and it's how I interpret it. I think that's just really good writing, how you can put out a movie where you could ignore the social commentary if you want to, and it still makes it
a good stands alone.
Like, they may have started writing this because of that social commentary piece, but like it just stood on itself, and I think that's good writing, that's good storytelling.
And I think that's why this one stands out in my mind so much more than a lot of other kind of lower budget horror movies that I would have seen around the same time. Like there was a lot of substance to this one and a lot of creativity, and there were even some like pretty hilarious scenes, like when Shuya ends up with the pot lid for a weapon. I just had forgotten that, and I laughed out loud when it happened, just because it was so ridiculous, compared to everybody else getting a crossbow or a gun or something.
Yeah, that was the other thing I was going to ask you, and I just I don't necessarily remember. I was getting COVID when I was watching this, like it was on the early stages.
Yeah,
and how did they get the weapons? Did they assign them to them?
It was supposedly random.
Okay.
They were handing them those bags as they were leaving the school the beginning, and those had them.
I just cannot remember.
It also seemed a little too convenient that the two transfers got better weapons than everyone else. Like, I think they were definitely plants that were there meant to make sure that the violence ensued and that people didn't just drift apart. And so I think, because there was the thing where the one guy was like, no, that's not my bag, this is my bag. I think that there was some tipping the scale towards them, but I think the rest were mostly random.
So what benefit who would have benefited from the violence happening?
Well, I think
just the weirdos up at the headquarters.
Yeah, the ones who were in control, because the idea is, well, I don't know. Like I said, maybe the book would make this all make more sense, but it seems like, oh yeah, these kids have all become so violent and don't care about society, so let's make them take that. It's kind of like if your dad caught you smoking a cigarette and he's like, all right, you're going to sit here and smoke the whole pack. It's like, oh, you kids are going to give up on society and have no regard for the rule of law. Okay, well, let's just toss you into a cannibalistic war zone and see how much violence you like. And only one person can get out. And so it's almost like a punishment, sort of, for them to have to live through it. But if everybody just ran and hid, I guess that would kind of be a lost cause.
I guess, and my point with it is, if that's the case, and ultimately, too, like, this is just going to get rid of all but one person, then why would you even plan them and not just kill them all? I mean, I'm not saying that that's right. I'm just saying, like, those were the kind of weird things that I was kind of thinking of.
Yeah, it seemed like a super elaborate setup for just getting rid of a bunch of kids.
My thought was like, well, if it's just population control, then you're just doing it. You're just being even more cruel.
Yeah,
you could. Here's the thing: send them to another place that has less population. But what did you have like a favorite death scene?
So the very first, or I guess in the school building, when there was like the friend with the neck monitor, that was like disarmingly graphic.
Yeah.
And hard to watch just because like you understood the friendship and everything there. Right. And so that was when it really got intense and really set the tone for a lot of the rest of it. But there was also the one, like that final battle with the blonde guy whose name I didn't write down anywhere.
Yeah,
that was
transfer student.
Yes.
Yeah,
and there was that scene where it's like he's been blinded and there's the blood tears coming out of his eyes. That was just creepy AF, and so that one stands out a lot in my mind. But it really wasn't that. I felt like that fight was like less epic than it could have been.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%.
Like it felt like almost a little bit anticlimactic. So
blinded from the bombs, and then mine was the poisoning scene. I think that was one of my favorite scenes. When the girl is poisoning the food that they're going to feed to the main guy. What was his name?
Shuya.
He came back. He was hurt, and he comes up to there's a group of girls that are there, and they're making food, and basically kind of working on a plan. And one of the girls hates him, and so she goes to poison his food. And then a girl who had been out like gathering stuff comes in, sits down, and just like goes at the soup. And you see the oh shit from the poisoner.
Yes.
And then the girl, like, that she has the blood come down, like her with her eyes. That was pretty crazy. That was a pretty crazy death scene, but also like what ensued after, like they were all dead.
Yeah. It took me a second to remember what you were talking about with the poison, just because it was the scene right after that really stood out in my mind. That was a really, really well choreographed and really well shot, like creatively shot scene that just was very attention grabbing for sure.
And all it took was that one, I guess all but one died, but all it took was like that one slip up that took these girls who were, I don't want to say they were like happy, but I'm saying they were doing okay for themselves to just everyone just fucking gone.
Yeah.
Just that, you have that girl like dead on the table while all this stuff is going on too. And it's just like, gosh, this is intense.
Yeah, it was like that little bit of trust between them was just so brittle.
Oh, yeah.
That it didn't take much at all to snap it, and then everything just went insane.
Yeah, and putting yourself in their shoes, throughout the whole film, it's like that's what that's what they were dealing with the whole time. So much so
absolutely.
that with the ending, when they trick the guy who did the competition, was it the year before and won?
Yes,
I think it was the year before and won. Like, so much so that like that's how they tricked the headquarter, whatever, the teacher. That's how they got him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because he just couldn't even think about believing that they wouldn't continue all killing each other, that anybody in that situation would be able to work together.
Yeah.
And then I did like the ending. Like, I felt like the ending was a very horror ending, in that even though they survived and got out, they were still just on the run and being worried all the time, and never knew when somebody was going to come out of nowhere to attack them. Like, it was like a happy ending in that they survived, but it wasn't a happy ending for them. And I feel like that always makes a horror movie stick with you more. Right.
You just get on the boat and just keep heading west.
Yeah.
Make it over to the United States. You'll be fine.
Or they take a wrong turn, end up in New Zealand, running some of those zombies. You'd been better off staying home.
Zombies out there, yeah.
Can't always win.
All in all, man, this was another good pick. I was definitely, like, when you said Battle Royale, I was like, God damn, he did it again. Because I knew this one, so I was like, oh, he knows.
I was really excited to have a chance to watch this one and talk about it with you, just because I remember I really liked it at the time, but now it's been long enough that it felt kind of fresh going back to it.
Oh, yeah.
And so, and it held up for me. I was very pleasantly surprised.
There were a ton of things I forgot about throughout the film.
Yes. Yeah.
So it was like rewatching it for the first time. And then with the dubbing too, I was like, ugh. But
you can definitely
on Tubi. I'll listen to a dub film any day for freezies.
And when you're not relying on having to read the subtitles, I feel like you catch more of what's on camera, and so I think that helped too. But
but it also, like, don't get me wrong, I don't want this to happen, but like it also kind of makes me like a little okay for like AI when it comes to voice actors.
Oh, for like dubbing.
Because it was like some of the emotion that they were putting into this was like, that does not match the face. Like, you're screaming right now, and they just said it. I can match what they said. Yeah.
Well, and it was really distracting on mine because I typically just by default have the subtitles turned on, and the subtitles in this were, I think, the subtitles for the original dialogue of the movie. Whereas the translation in the dub was different. So, like, what they were saying versus what was at the bottom of the screen was, like, pretty different sometimes. Yeah. And it was interesting just to think through, like, how you would go about translating something like this. Because I'm sure there's a lot about the nuances of the Japanese language that are kind of hard to translate into another language in scenarios like this crazy and violent and, like, taboo, you know? Yeah. So... yeah, I don't know. It was kind of an interesting thing to see.
Well, I could confirm that for sure because my uncle was a runner when he was in the Navy. He was on a running, he was based out in Okinawa, and he was on like a running group where they get together and run. Mm-hmm. And his name that they gave him, his Japanese name, was Sand in My Crack. And so I asked him, how do you say that? And he goes, it's just too much to try to figure out. He goes, I know what they're saying. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it happens.
Yep. But yeah, all in all, good one. Great start to doing movies that came out after 1999.
We come back next year. Yeah, feels good.
And that's it for today's episode. If you've listened this far, then thank you, and we hope you've enjoyed it. We're always looking for new ideas, so if you have any questions, comments, or movie suggestions, please send us an email at thehorrificpod@gmail.com or hit us up on the IG. That's what the kids call Instagram. Just search for The Horrific Podcast. Thanks for listening.